Thanks, Dave. Hey, thanks everybody for coming out. I know it's below 60 degrees, which for somebody like me, born and raised in Florida, that's basically freezing. So pretty good turnout considering. Excited for the meeting tonight. A couple quick announcements before we get started. Our spring grant season just started. So we give out $500 grants for nonprofits to do landscaping projects with native plants. So if anybody knows a nonprofit that is looking to redesign their landscape with some natives, please direct them to our website, and then maybe we can review their application and help them out. Also, the annual conference for the Florida Native Plant Society is coming up. I think it's April 2nd to April 5th or April 6th. And they have like an early bird special discount right now. So you can attend online, it's like $65, or you can attend in person, which I believe it's in Gainesville. But if you're interested in that, check out the website. It's all over the website. And then as far as our speaker tonight, we have Chelsea Wisner. Hope I said that right. She came all the way to us from Wauchula. And she is a Florida Native Plant Society member of the Serenoa chapter. And she's also the land protection manager for Conservation Florida, a nonprofit here. And she's going to be talking about the history of the Peace River Valley, how that has been influenced by phosphate over the years. So a super interesting and relevant topic for anybody in Florida, but super lucky to have Chelsea here tonight. So without further ado, Chelsea, thank you.
Hello, everyone, and hello to the online participants. I'm going to try to look directly at you for a lot of this, but I am going to be sharing my screen. So sorry if you're just seeing a whole lot of my chin tonight. All right. So that worked, hopefully. And we got that. Also, because what presentation is ever, incomplete without some kind of amount of technical difficulty. I don't have my notes for this, so I'm going to be winging some of it, but luckily we got plenty on the screen to be talking about. So thank you for joining me tonight. I am excited to tell you about the place that Hunter and I have turned into our home in Florida over the last 7 years or so. So we set up residence in Wauchula, which is in the Hardee County area. And as far as, attention for conservation, it's kind of a forgotten child of this region. So I hope to remedy some of that tonight. So we're going to be talking about the Peace River Valley, which extends from Polk County all the way down to Charlotte Harbor. It does extend a bit into Hillsborough, Manatee, Sarasota, Highlands, and Glades County. It's about 1.5 million acres, give or take. And the river itself is 106 miles long. It has its headwaters in Polk County. Some sources online will tell you that it's at Lake Hancock. However, the actual watershed itself does reach all the way to Green Swamp. So I think it's really amazing that this Peace River connects Green Swamp all the way to Charlotte Harbor, which, on paper, those areas don't look like they're interconnected at all. But, ecology always tells us that things are more interconnected than maybe they seem. Some background on myself. I've been a Floridian since 2017. I've done a lot of work with threatened and endangered species management. So I consider myself a jack of all trades. I am certainly not a botanist, so please forgive me on that tonight. I'm going to do my best to bring some attention to the plants of this region. But really this will be more of an all-encompassing presentation about why this area looks the way it does today. The Peace River is a blackwater stream, which characteristically is slow flowing and nutrient rich. The water is very tannic and tea colored from all of the abundant decomposing plant matter and sediment in the river. For any of you math nerds in the audience, 1.5 million acres, give or take, is equivalent to 2,300 square miles. So one of the questions that I've posed living on the Peace River is how it got its name. And I've heard a lot of different answers to this question over the years. And in doing my digging, it seems that the genesis of this name came in the 1600s when it was explored by Spanish explorers. There are some maps dating back to the 1600s that label it as Rio de la Paz, which translates to River of Peace. And it seems like that is how it got its name today. Other places where I did some research on this speculated that the name came from River of Long Peas because of the abundance of legumes on the river. But that doesn't quite make sense to me. I'm not sure what those legumes would be. I've also heard speculation that it was called Peas River because of the like yellow green color of the phosphate. That also doesn't seem correct. It's been a constant freshwater supply, not just for modern day Americans, where it supplies about 100,000 of us with drinking water, but it's also been a freshwater supply for Colusa Creek and Seminole Indians before us today. And of course, the freshwater flow not only provides opportunity for drinking water and recreation opportunity, but it also provides freshwater flow into the Charlotte Harbor, which maintains that balanced salinity of that ecosystem as well. I just wanted to make a quick note about this photo on the left-hand side of your screen there. It's pretty unique in that this area of the river has never been mined. So this was a property that's up for conservation opportunity in Polk County. And these landowners were very proud about the fact that, you know, their family has owned this property long enough to know that this piece of river has never been disturbed, which is pretty unique, all things considered. So the ground composition definitely seemed a little bit different. I don't know if that's just anecdotal, but it was special nonetheless. So this is a pretty typical cross section of what you expect. So, you know, that characteristic black water, tannic water, lots of vegetation overhanging the banks. I mean, you got plenty of plant people in the audience, so if you know any species, shout them out. Variety of oaks, willows, things of that nature. And like I said, I'm not a botanist, but I did collect some species together that are kind of not characteristic, but somewhat unique relative to the rest of like the Heartland, Florida. I spent a lot of time along the Lake Wales Ridge and like Highlands and Polk County. So getting to walk around the Peace River Park, which is across the street from where Hunter and I live, we get to see some species that I really don't come across elsewhere unless I'm on the Peace River in this area. So water hickory is like one of the first ones. White fringe tree is a delightful little tree that when it blooms just has such charismatic white dainty flowers that smell pretty nice. Yellow fringed orchid. And if anyone has any fun facts about these plants, feel free to shout them out. Help me out here. My friend Brett wanted me to note that this might be some of the most southern extent of the yellow fringed orchid. So I appreciate him for helping me there. Sweet gum. I know this isn't like a particularly exciting or novel plant down here in South Central Florida. Obviously up north, it's really a bit of a forestry pest, but you know, I think it seems to like, especially in the southern extent of its range, those more nutrient rich soils that you can find along the Peace River where, you know, if you head more toward the ridge are harder to find. Water locust, this one's fun as long as you don't run into it because it does have very characteristic long spines on there. So definitely want to be on the lookout for that one when you're down by the river. And then again, not one that's necessarily unique, but it's just so delightful. I mean, how could you not like something that's called sparkleberry? And you know, farkleberry is fine too, but I think that's a better common name in my opinion. You may have heard of the Peace River before referred to as Bone Valley. And that is because this riverbed is composed of a bunch of different layers, some of which includes very high concentrations of ancient marine organisms from when Florida was covered by a shallow sea. Moreover, once the water receded a bit, the river remained just that, a source of fresh water like it's been for humans during our history, and theoretically provided a year-round drinking water supply for large mammals from the Pleistocene era, things like mastodons and giant armadillos and tapirs and glyptodons, which you might have seen those in a natural history museum. They kind of look like Pokemon. They're round, like armored armadillo looking things. And then from further back in the day, we have things like megalodon. That kind of seems to be like the gold standard of a fossil find in the Peace River. We've gone fossil hunting a bit. We've found some of the evidence of rays and other sharks, but haven't had our opportunity with the megalodon tooth yet. So the high concentration of previous animal life in the river has created phosphate, which we'll go into a bit of detail later, but is an essential component of fertilizer. It was discovered in 1881. For reference and historical context, Florida became a state in 1845. So we weren't even 40 years into being an American state yet when this huge discovery was made. So less than a decade after phosphate was initially discovered, just south of Fort Meade, 200 companies were mining the mineral in the Peace River Valley. And it skyrocketed the price of land from $1.25 to $300 an acre. So from our inception as a state, we've had some serious markets that remain evergreen today, phosphate being one of them. Some of the other things that, you know, when you think of Florida, you think of citrus. Maybe less people think of timber, but that is obviously still a viable industry here, as well as cattle ranching and row cropping. And so these are not just industrial industries that have withstood the test of time, but they also have a lot of cultural impact as well. So what's phosphate got to do with it? Well, I told you we just became a state in 1845. It was only 5 years before that we even knew that phosphorus played a critical role in plant growth. So all of these things happen very quickly. At its inception of the discovery, bird and bat guano were being mined out in the tropical islands for this resource as a fertilizer. But as you can imagine, that quickly came and went. So by the mid-1900s, the main source of this mineral was coming from mines like you see today, digging it out of the ground. Of course you can.
Phosphates, was that part of the fossilization process?
Yes, yes. So it all got encapsulated in that layer. And it came from the plant, or sorry, from the marine mammals, and sorry, mammals didn't exist then.
Phosphate is a fossil in and of itself. Or
It's a mineral component of living life. So when you have a bunch of dead stuff solidified into a rock layer, it becomes embedded within that. But unfortunately, that's kind of the extent of my knowledge on that. But thank you for thinking I could answer that question well. So today, about 40 countries produce phosphate, and we're mining about 200 million tons a year. About 80% of what is mined gets turned into fertilizer that in turn fortifies our soils, because 3/4 of the soils on Earth do not contain this mineral in and of themselves enough to facilitate crop growth. So it's a necessary component for eating vegetables, which I imagine lots of us like to do. Because I am not an expert, I have a video from some folks who are that are going to explain what phosphate mining looks like. And hopefully it will work.
Mine phosphates is a critical component that everyone needs. The phosphate production process begins by first blue gold burden off the top into your matrix layer. Matrix is a mixture of phosphate, sand, and place, anywhere from 10 to 30 feet down to the top of your matrix. So that no one gets to that depth, they take a bucket, take a look at it, see if it has phosphate in it, and if it does, find that matrix out, move it to your pit car. We're using high pressure water, gun that with slurry. And then we pump it down a 20-inch pipeline back to the milling process. The matrix slurry comes into the top of the mill, and then the distribution box up there, and allows us to segregate into different trains. Your primary glue screen is the first screen that you get when you come out of the distribution box. So it's going to remove a lot of clays and a lot of your smaller sands. Then it moves to the primary laboratory screens. So there we're using water and washing it. We're separating out that 1/4 millimeter size products. And then it gets to the log washer. So that actually mechanically tries to break up those larger pieces, the smaller ones, and for size out, that one gets fed to the flow plant. The way it works is the first condition of feed come in, pH adjuster, that actually binds to the phosphate and allows the phosphate to become less dense. So it actually floats to the top of the foam. The paddles are scraping foam and has phosphate rock in it. Once we have phosphate rock in the bottom, to take that, transfer it into the chemical plants. They'll mix there with sulfuric, which creates gypsum and phosphoric acid. Once you make the phosphoric acid, you can go into NLP products, fertilizer, food products, soft drinks. It's something that maybe most people don't know about. And it's important that they do know this. This is what we do. You take a lot of pride in the work we do. Because we take this material from the ground and turn it into something that is a useful form for plant life and for organisms, for us to, so it can be the future.
So obviously it's a bit of an invasive process to remove all of the topsoil and dig 30 feet down. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you, group of folks, that, you know, ground disturbance in and of itself opens up, you know, a well of opportunity for things like invasive species to take hold. And I think that has a lot of influence on maybe why this area is so under-conserved. So remember, we didn't discover phosphate until 1881. Well, 100 years later, by 1890, the mining that occurs in Central Florida accounts for 30% of the worldwide production of phosphate. So not only is this a huge industry in Florida, but we are also allowing the world to fertilize their crops by the work that we are doing in our backyard. The United States Geological Survey says that 93% of Tampa Bay's exports are phosphates, which that number blew my mind. Driving down State Road 62, you might have seen a scene similar to this one. I think that's right where we took this photo. And that is one of the diggers that you saw in that video just now. And, you know, this is one of many. So of course, this is where my notes would be helpful. So we're just going to wing it. Because this industry has such an impact on Florida from our inception and before, you know, photography was even very common, we kind of have to go back in time to know what it looked like before we changed it. So for the, you know, remainder of this presentation, we're going to be going from 1870 to present day. But so this is one of my favorite maps of Florida that exists. It was drafted in 1856 by the War Department as part of the Seminole Indian War, which also has a very connected history with the Peace River Valley. And it shows a really good summary of the habitat types that existed here. So if you could imagine that river basin boundary that you were seeing before, it would encompass areas that were, you know, flatwoods that we know today. It also encompassed a big area that they're calling Big Prairie, which I think you'd be hard pressed to find any amount of prairie in any of these areas nowadays. And one of the first forts that was built for the Seminole War occurred right at that spot where they found phosphate in the first place. And if you join us, quick plug for the field trip on Saturday. If you join us for the field trip on Saturday, we will get to see right in the backyard of that area, and they actually have some exhibits on the history of that in the area as well. So some of the earliest photos that I could find of phosphate mining in this area are on the screen up on the right-hand side. So you could see it really started on the river itself before it moved off into the uplands adjacent to it. The fella in the center there is named Jacob Summerlin. He is supposedly the first person that was born in Florida after it became a territory in 1820. He was a big deal because he made his living cultivating cattle between the Peace River and the Kissimmee River. And his family actually provided the land that created the county seats of Bartow in Orlando. So I just thought that was a cool way to link this all back together. And then the train car and the fellows down there, that was some of the first locomotives that would move the phosphate from the mines to Charlotte Harbor, where it was being shipped out domestically and internationally. So of course, where there is industry, there is development. And part of being able to market your product is getting it to ports of sale. So in 1888, the Florida Southern Railway was pitched and began its development. And with that, the US government deeded the railroad about 3 million acres of land. And they said, if you come and live in these green areas, we will give you the land for free, so long as you sell your product via the railway. So this was really the first time that we saw a significant influx of people to this region. And of course, you know, ostensibly, those were folks that were working these phosphate mines or maybe doing cattle ranching. So I would say that this is probably when you first see some of that like land change beginning, conversion of native lands to improved pasture, whatever else have you. So this is really, you know, I think when you think about Florida history and the development of it, your mind kind of goes to Miami, right? Because that was one of the first railways that were put in, but we weren't far behind. We might not get a whole lot of the attention, but a lot of this has been happening from the beginning. So this photo was taken around 1900, and Louis Frisbee says that it really could have been taken at any point before the river widens near the Gulf. And he wants to make sure you note that there is a complete absence of water hyacinth, because of course, already at this point, that was already prevalent in a lot of our waterways throughout the state. So, and I don't know, we could speculate as to why there was no water hyacinth here. Maybe it was the high flow rate of the river at this point that was kind of dissuading it from becoming established. And then in 1918, J.K. Small took a jaunt down the Peace River and captured this photo near Zolfo Springs. So we could see some of the charismatic plants that we still see today, like bald cypress, but very difficult to deduce some records of this place before it got churned up. In addition to the railroad development that allowed the, shipping of this phosphate down to Charlotte Harbor and then out to wherever it may have ended, in 1923, we started really earnestly building some roads in the state. And again, you can see how significantly developed the East Coast is down by Miami. But again, Tampa Bay and the surrounding area is not far behind. And to remind you, at this point in time, cars are kind of a new invention. And this is what it looked like at the time to get around Florida. And this really just tickles me because as someone who's done a lot of field work in this state, these people are tougher than me. I cannot imagine driving out onto the prairie in a Model T or whatever kind of rudimentary vehicle that was on like wooden tires to get around. So I just think that is incredible that, by this point we were building roads, not just for, industry, but also for residential development and for recreational means as well. So this photo from 1929, you can see some of the limestone escarpments that are still very charismatic of portions of the Peace River. And then I really enjoyed this photo. It's really the only one that represents a stretch of the river that meets the estuary. So this is from Charlotte County, and you can see there are yucca flower blooming on the river's edge. By 1938, the phosphate mining is no longer just kind of a mom and pop hand tool situation. It's really a fine-tuned machine with a lot of money supporting it. So at this point, we have railways that are going directly to the processing plants. This was a drying mill. I'm trying to do this off memory from my notes. And I think at this point, this was from a Bartow-based company that was producing 85% of the phosphate that was coming out of Florida. And of course, with that enormous amount of work that was happening, we started to earnestly move the landscape. So this is a water supply ditch that was dug from the Peace River to the plant. Like you saw in that video earlier, not only are we messing with the river to extract this resource, but it also takes a lot of water in order to process it into a usable product. And much like the photo that you saw from modern day, we already had, big earth moving machines to do this for us by 1949. This was International's bigger digger is what they called it. And it was moving, I think, 3,000 tons, metric cubic feet. I don't know, something like that. It was moving a lot of earth every day. And so one of the casualties that we see in this area, perhaps to this new industry, which, we don't know for sure, but it does seem like these two things were interrelated, was Kissingen Spring. So if you've heard about this before, it was a second magnitude spring that was located just outside of Bartow. It's that little squiggly line between the two red dots at the top of the map there. And it used to discharge 20 million gallons of water a day into the Peace River. However, it ceased to flow in 1950. And supposedly it was the first spring in Florida to cease its natural flow due to human involvement. So it used to be 200 feet wide and 17 feet deep. It was a common recreation place for swimming. And as of 2006, it looked something like this. So not only did it cease to flow water into the Peace River, but because of the way it was altered, now it actually takes water from the river and backfeeds. So this puddle will rise and fall with the river level as well. It is on private property, so it's very hard to find photo documentation of this. But from what I can tell from the last photo that you saw, these two wooden posts over here, I believe were part of that platform that you just saw in the photo before it. And of course, by this time, again, we don't just have industrial industry in this area. We have people coming here to recreate. And I just thought that was so delightful to see that car pulling that boat. And not only that, but we also had a phosphate museum already at this point in time. This is located in Mulberry, and I believe you could still visit it today. Hopefully they've updated their exhibit since then. And then this is a graphic that shows you from 1973, where it's really clustered in the center, how it's grown outward over the last several decades. And that's kind of the nature of this beast. You can only upturn a part of land and then you're done with it and you have to move on. So it's going to be a pressure that we continue to see move outward on the landscape. Not only that, but of course, we're also seeing increased population growth. This is probably one of the smallest population trends that you'll find for an area of Florida, but that doesn't mean you could shake it. You know, Polk County last year was the fastest growing county in the nation, if not of one of many. So of course, we're seeing a lot of development pressure from the north down. But also for those of you in Charlotte, I'm sure we're seeing it from the south up as well. So Hardee County and northern Desoto are kind of opportunity areas for where some preservation of these lands can happen that maybe won't be affected by sprawl by 2070. Yeah.
Is there any regulation or attempt to return places to any kind of natural state? Is there
Yes.
coal mining? Tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah. So I believe it was in 1990, which I could be wrong, but it was much later into the history of phosphate mining that the laws changed and they required them to mitigate for or reclaim the mines. So making me jump ahead, but that's just fine. No, it's all good. You were just right ahead of me, so it's good. I'm right on pace. So the orange polygons that you see there, back it up. So blue is the river basin, like we've been talking about. The yellow roundish outline is what the Florida Department of Environmental Protections considers the conceptual phosphating mining limit. And that's about 1,300 acres of land where this phosphate exists and could theoretically be mined into the future. So,
Sorry, another question. Where's the Mayaka River? Is it to the west?
I think.
It's west, yeah. So just west.
But you can see the two lakes.
Yeah.
You can see Upper Mayaca Lake and
I
Lower
see.
Mayaca.
So it's
Yeah, so coming this way. Yep.
There's a separate water basin.
Yes.
Well, no, the Manatee County portion of the Mayaca is in the,
Peace River drainage.
is in the
Oh,
phosphate.
so it flows. Oh, okay, I got it. I see.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is Mosaic the only company that does, I was seeing Nutri or something like that?
Yeah, I think that was actually a video that was produced from like a Western phosphate company. I do have a map that I can show at the end. I elected to remove it, but there's not very many other places in the United States where you can mine phosphate. So there's like a little cohort out in like Western Washington and was that Idaho? But we are definitely the
They come and go out of business and they just changed their name. So when I
Gotcha.
moved to Sarasota, it was Garden Egg.
Yes, and there's lots of iterations. There are some small companies. I think a lot of those have been bought by Mosaic over time. So that is kind of like the most recognizable name, but they're not the only one. But collectively, all of the phosphate companies own about 450,000 acres of land. And so, you know, that includes these polygons that you're seeing. So the orange ones are active mines. The pink polygons are reclaimed mines. So these are areas that in the past have been mined and, you know, they came after that, I think 1990, 1980 point where they were required to, you know, essentially mitigate for the disturbance that they implemented. That paired with the conservation data kind of tells a fuller picture of what's going on. So I thought it was interesting looking at these things together that there's a lot of conservation going on the western side outside of the Peace River Basin. But really where those two things overlap, there's not a whole lot of conserved lands. So as far as trying to put a positive spin on this, that's room for opportunity, right? Hardee County is one of the least conserved counties in the state. And obviously lots of these areas are ostensibly owned by phosphate companies that they haven't mined them yet. And who knows, you know, when and if, right? But a lot of these lands are also owned by cattle ranchers and citrus producers. And so, of course, looking toward the Florida Wildlife Corridor, these are places where there's work to be done. And, you know, maybe it's a matter of connecting with these communities to engage their interest. And, you know, as a land conservancy, a lot of times you're trying to build trust before you can make work happen. And so there's opportunity. There are places like this that exist and folks that want to see them conserved. So there are folks like Conservation Florida. We're a statewide land conservancy that aims to protect land. But we've also have some awesome folks in this region that are doing it too. More regionally, Big Waters Land Trust, as well as Florida Conservation Group, are all working toward protecting Florida's water, wildlife, and wild places, and connecting the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which is my bread and butter. And how do we do that? Of course, that's by facilitating, purchasing, or accepting donations of land and conservation easements, serving as a trusted community partner for statewide land conservation, and through advocacy, education, and outreach programming. And that, of course, is because we're all looking to form a connected statewide corridor that supports healthy wildlife populations, allows people spaces to get out and enjoy these things, while contributing to a strong economy and supporting working family ranches. And of course, protecting our water supply, because even if you don't care about conservation, I think everyone likes having fresh water to drink. I hinted at community engagement and trust being a part of that. Connecting with groups like the Cattlemen's Association was a big part of it, because these folks, you know, have the trust in one another, and then hopefully we can build upon that, because really conservation can't be done without partnerships. A shameless plug, we just won a Suncoast Emmy for our series, Protect Our Paradise. So if you're curious just in general about any of the things we've talked about today, just wildlife conservation, water, please check it out. And then briefly on our state park visit this Saturday, it's a pretty good sampling of what you might come to expect. We're going to be taking a walk parallel to Paynes Creek, which is a tributary to the Peace River, and then taking a look at the Peace River itself, since it's been such a hot button issue for today. And then some historical context to the state park, since it does have history in the name. It was not too far from the location that in 1835, the United States asked Chief Osceola to sign a peace treaty, to which he said, heck no, which initiated the second of the 3 Seminole Indian Wars. And I believe the Seminole Indian tribe was the only one in the United States that never signed a peace treaty with the United States. And of course, if you're familiar with some of the Seminole reservations that exist in Florida today, those are down south. And that's because after they refused to sign the peace treaty, those that were not captured or killed were pushed into the Everglades and kind of became what most people know of the Seminole Indian tribe today. So with that, I'm going to take any questions. Yes.
You come across any maps showing the footprint of affected area?
By phosphate. I'm sure that data is available, although, you know, like looking into the, go back to these.
And I mean historical impact, so,
Sure,
you know, DEP has.
they do.
current Phosphate in modern phosphate, but it's really obscure to me what exactly happened in turn of the century, you know, 1950s, this kind of time period.
Yeah, I just had that. Where did you go? One of these mining data. Guys, gotta look behind the curtain for all the stuff I've been stashing for this. Okay. So I think this is the best that I can do. This is supposedly all of the historic phosphate mining, and this is FDEP data. So zooming in. So pretty much at the core of that polygon, but obviously kind of extending more into Hardee County than what those maps that I was showing earlier were indicating. It is really hard to find. And honestly, there was no real good like central repository for a lot of this information. It was very much piecemeal together from different sources. And then also to show you that other, yeah.
Wondered about is how much of the Peace River, let's say in Desoto County,
Mhm.
the shoreline is the original shoreline. I have
No way to tell. Yeah, no way of knowing. And I think it's kind of both a blessing and a curse to not know. You know, I think from a conservation perspective, you want to know, like, is this intact? Like when I met those landowners in Polk County, that they're like, we know that this has never been mined because we own the mineral rights and we've never allowed it to be mined. Like, awesome. But how many other iterations of that really exist? And especially people that have the wherewithal to know that they own the oil, gas, and mineral rights of their property as well. So definitely a novelty. And I don't know that there's like a great way to tell either, because even if it hasn't been mined by phosphate, I mean, you know that, oh, geez, if it's been, you know, heavily grazed by cattle, it can have very similar like superficial effects on the erosion of the riverbed as well. This was the map that I told you I opted to not include. So this is where phosphate mining exists throughout the rest of the country. The green polygons that are behind the black ones are critical habitat. This was a map that was produced by the Center for Biological Diversity. So obviously they have a different type of swing to it, but the triangles were phosphate or phosphogypsum stacks. So if you've driven down 62 and you see those big red and white stacks that stand like 200 feet tall, that's what we're talking about. So an interesting part of phosphate mining is that when they do all that churning up and take out the pieces that they want, a lot of the topsoil isn't disturbed and that can be returned. And then you see what that turns into. It gets covered in Kogan grass and you can plant /pine and graze cattle on it. But as far as like returning it to natural glory, I'm sure any botanist would tell you that that's not possible. But another byproduct of this disturbance is that phosphogypsum byproduct, which has some carcinogenic properties. And unfortunately, you can't really do anything with it once you have it. So the solution that we've had, is to stack it into those stacks and let it sit. I think it was France uses some phosphogypsum to pave their roads with, and there was an idea to do that in Florida a couple years ago. And I don't know what mechanism turned that down, if it was public outcry or government said no. But we weren't willing to find out if that has an effect on, public health by using that as a road paving service. But so at the moment, there's nothing we can really do about those phosphogypsum stacks. They just are, and they're on the landscape. And what comes next for those is kind of unclear. I think in my research, I read that in 1994, there was an incident where one of those stacks just collapsed into the ground. That's not great because that's potentially polluting our aquifer. So I think that's kind of, the mitigation land is one thing, but what to do with this byproduct that we don't really have a use for or safe way of disposing of it, I think is a bigger one to be addressed. Yeah.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Did Alpine
Within the river basin? That's a good question.
what have you thought of that?
I think, there's different levels of restoration, right? I'm aware that it is incredibly economically limiting. So I think the Alafai State Park is a great recreational opportunity for folks. Like I know a lot of bike riding happens there. I've seen a lot of like bike races and things of that nature, which is a community resource that we need as well. As far as marvelous natural space, will it ever be that? Probably not. But I think working in conservation has taught me that not everything can be like a Payne's Prairie, right? And we do need those other sorts of community resources. We have a small city-owned park across the street from us, and it's full of invasives. It's all guinea grass, but it's nice to go walk around anyway and just try to put your blinders on to see anything but all the invasive species that are around you. But moreover, these floodplain ecosystems, like there is inherent disturbance that happens during flood events. So another thing that I'm grateful for about at least for the invasives dominant park across the street from me is that, during Hurricane Ian, water had a place to go and my house stayed dry. A lot of other houses in my neighborhood did not get to say the same thing. So I think, to the Alafai point too, that's another area where temporary water storage can happen during flooding events so that, hopefully water can, have places to go that aren't people's homes, but also, it's still permeable land that allows the aquifer to be recharged that we wouldn't have if it was something else. So, so many questions. Yes?
I have an association of phosphate mining and radiation.
Mhm.
What can you tell me anything about that? And
I don't know anything about that in detail. I imagine that sounds like it goes hand in hand with like the carcinogenic properties of that phosphogypsum that we don't quite know what to do with. Because of course there are other byproducts of this as well. Some of that you can turn it into things like, oh really? See, Yes, yes. So radon is definitely a byproduct that is an issue. And I know, I think the rule is that when something is disturbed for phosphate mining, it has to sit for 50 years before you can like do something else with that land in order to allow that radon time to settle out or do whatever it does. Half-life, thank you. Again, not a geologist, but thank you for helping me. Yes?
So, in the period between when the phosphate mining started in the 1920s in earnest,
Mhm.
and maybe it was in the 1980s that the state said that you had to have these reinforced berms around the clay settling areas. There were lots of clay spills into the Peace River.
Yeah, and we really across the board didn't have a whole lot of water protection until like the 1970s. And I think, to Lee's point earlier, there's so much of this history of this industry that happened while we were learning, or like maybe we learned from it, that there's a lot that we know better now. And I think that's another great example of that, where, nowadays, even when you're just trying to do some road work, you have to put that sediment fencing out so it's not pouring into our ditches and other things like that. So.
And we have done some canoeing on the Peace River, and we would start in Bartow, and we would be heading towards Fort Meade, and we would notice that the water was leaving the channel and going into a giant sinkhole in the floodplain.
Yep.
And we would wade over there hauling the canoes, and we could see mature laurel oak trees
Just getting
had fallen into this giant deep sinkhole.
Yep. Well, and you can see Lakeland at the top of the zone there, and it's kind of one of the areas that you think of to be like a sinkhole hotspot. And I mean, I'm sure for anyone that lives in Florida and has dug a hole in their yard, you see how much it takes like for that to compact and fill back in. And when you're doing that at such a big scale, incidences like that are bound to happen. So it's an unfortunate side effect of it.
So we've sold a lot of phosphate to Russia over the years, and there's a legend that they were not only using it for fertilizer, but extracting the uranium. But what I wanted to point out is that boundary, if you look at the legend, says conceptual phosphate mineable limit. What's mineable depends on the quality of the ore, the depth of the matrix, and the ratio of the matrix to the overburden. And if you look at the historic maps of what was feasible to mine, it was much smaller, but as the value of the phosphate increases, what's feasible to mine increases. And there are phosphate holdings that actually touch Sarasota County. The Carlton Ranch has adjacent owners that own the mineral rights. And of course, it's hard to deal with mineral rights without destroying the land surface. And there's phosphate under most of Sarasota County. I hope you all know that it's illegal to disturb the bottom of the Mac River to look for shark's teeth, but there's lots of fossil material in the Mac River. When you pick up shark's teeth at Venice Beach, that's part of the Mon Valley Formation. So that's not a hard line. It's just represents somebody's calculation at a given point in time of what's economically conceivable. We were very lucky that Alan Horton, a reporter, and Walter Prophet, who was the editor of the Herald Tribune, worked with the Sarasota County Commission to get rules adopted that virtually prohibit phosphate mining within Sarasota County. But we are affected by phosphate mining in Manatee County, and could be more so in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this map shows what is currently being used, but that's not to say that they can't buy more land and expand from even the polygons within that mineable limit to begin with. So, yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about like reclamation? Is there a legal obligation for phosphate companies to replant native plants and then in essence manage that property? And does anybody like keep track of that?
Sure. I think FDP is the monitoring entity of that. The map that I had shown, this one, the pink areas have been totally reclaimed by the standards that they have and have been relinquished of any further obligation to that. So, you know, when you're driving up and down 17, especially on the south side of the road, you know, those big hills that are covered in Kogan grass and have cattle leases on them, those are reclaimed. So, you know, a lot of slash pine planted over Kogan grass, and that seems to be the standard expectation of those areas. So, you know, I would say that, you know, restoration for any property is really financially limiting. And especially when you're doing it at such a scale, I think they have to have realistic goals for them to achieve and be relinquished of that. I am not in a position to really voice an opinion about that. I think we all always want better. And I'm sure, you know, with some public attention, maybe that could happen. But also, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that, you know, this is a necessary component of the agricultural industry as a whole, right? Like with 75% of the worldwide soils being deficient in this mineral in order to cultivate it effectively, like, you know, how we clean up after ourselves, I think is going to take a lot of public involvement to change the status quo.
Is this the biggest phosphate area in the state?
Yes, by far.
There's also phosphate mining, in close to Georgia.
Yes. Yeah, I can pull that other map up again. I didn't know about Morocco, but I will say that I pretty much limited my research to Florida, so that's cool to know. So I'm assuming this is what you meant by up by Georgia. But when you see the collection of phosphogypsum stacks, you could see that we're pumping out a lot more than other folks. It's hard to see, but there's a lot of triangles overlapping one another there.
So I've heard that phosphate companies can pretty much use unlimited amounts of water from the aquifer. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know about that per se. I would imagine there's limitations on that, especially as the aquifer seems to be in, you know, less and less of a healthy position, but I don't want to speak to that with confidence because I don't know.
So Chelsea,
Yes.
so your organization focuses on trying to preserve lands that have not been touched by phosphate mining, or are you also involved in restoration or, you know, maybe I want to just the scope of what you're involved in?
Sure. Yeah. So coming across projects in this area is kind of hard to do. I will say that Julie Morris of Florida Conservation Group has much more of a handle on that region. So Conservation Florida works statewide, so we kind of have a spread all the way across. But we try to serve areas that are underserved by other land trusts. So like this footprint is served by Big Waters, which used to be the Conservation Foundation of the Gulf Coast, as well as Florida Conservation Group. So those are more like regional groups that are really targeting those communities and reaching out to the ranchers, the big landowners in that area. So for that reason, they've got it covered. I actually don't get to work a whole lot in the Peace River Valley. But I will say that in this last Rural and Family Lands Protection Program application window, there were folks that were applying in this area. So there are people that want to conserve their lands in this region. And I hope it'll be something that we see more of a priority moving forward. My philosophy, or at least thought, is that you know, the amount of money that any of us have to do conservation is always going to be, you know, less than we would like it to be, even reaching into federal, state, and private dollars to do that. So I think at present, we're at a point where there are still big native or semi-native lands that we have the opportunity to conserve. So I imagine once those kind of come and go, either they'll be conserved or they aren't, maybe there will be an attention shift to these areas that aren't as pristine because they've seen some amount of turbulence, whether that be like, you know, heavy conversion to improve pasture or to like these phosphate mines. I think at some point in time, there's going to have to be a switch where we prioritize those more highly for the water conservation values, moreover than the like, you know, plug and play. This is perfect. Like, let's acquire it and lock it down now. But I will say that another sprinkling of optimism is that last year NRCS awarded Florida Conservation Group an RCPP, so Regional Conservation Partnership Program award. I think it was $21 million. And that program is basically the watershed of the Peace River, and that's to do conservation easement acquisition in that area. So that will bring a new pot of money to that region that, you know, all of the land trusts in the area should theoretically be able to access to do development right purchases essentially for some of those larger producers in that area. So.
So you mentioned Julie Ward.
Yeah.
You know her by reputation.
I know her.
She's here.
Different Julie Morris. Yes. But it's nice to meet you, other Julie Morris, because I've seen your name too. And that confused the heck out of me the first time. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Seems like a silly question, but is the phosphate a function of the Peace River, or is it happened so long ago that the Peace River just happened to be coming down in an area where the phosphate was pre-existing?
So weird, like opportunity of just, you know, happenstance where it became a hotspot of phosphate reserves from when we were covered by a shallow sea. I don't know what mechanism made that happen, but, and then we found it and we started digging it out of the ground and we haven't stopped since. Yes, sir.
So 30 years ago, I probably went on 5 or 6 different phosphate tours.
Mhm.
And they consisted of going to the mining site, watching them excavate and pump the slurry and going to a beneficiation plant. And then they said they take you to a restoration site and put you in a van, sort of like an airport shuttle vehicle, and drive for 15 minutes, and you get out and there'd be 2 acres of wiregrass, and you get back in and drive 25 minutes in some other direction, and they'd show you another few acres. So they had some demonstration plots that they felt positively about. But when you looked at the scale of the area that we're talking about, it was pretty meager. So hopefully things have gotten better. There's FIPR, the Florida Institute of Phosphate Research, and they do research on reclamation, and I'm sure they have lots of papers they've published. But again, when you look at the magnitude of the land involved, it's so at that time it was pretty underwhelming.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, outside of phosphate reclamation lands, I think my general feeling toward a lot of restoration efforts across the board kind of is in that same direction, where you spend a lot of effort planting some pines and some wiregrass and spending a lot of time mitigating like Natal and Kogan. And, you know, I don't know at what point in doing that you really kind of get the momentum back, especially in cases like this where there's been so much ground disturbance that, like, you know, there's no seed bank. And there's no adjacency to good seed banks that are going to backfill this area. I think you could probably say the same thing about a lot of citrus lands as well. And so that, I think, is kind of a conservation hurdle across the board, just because the amount of time, you know, human hours plucking weeds or spraying weeds or planting things and watering them, like, it is so cost prohibitive to consider doing restoration large scale, that I think that will kind of be like a second generation conservation front at some point in the future, when all of the lands that haven't been so severely ground disturbed, like, kind of are either conserved or they've turned into something else. Yes.
Absence of the phosphate now going to affect the plant growth? I mean, weren't the plants?
So the phosphate that it could be, the phosphate that they're mining is typically 10 to 30 feet below the topsoil. So I can't speak with confidence about that. You know, also a lot of the Florida plants love to grow in nutrient poor soils. So hopefully that won't be true. And I will say again, because I was just telling someone today, I was like, working in conservation feels like this weird dichotomy where you have to live between like delusional optimism and just oppressive pessimism for what's going on. And so that's something that I live with every day of my life. And one positive spin that I can put on this, to the maybe dissatisfaction of some of these reclamation lands, is just that, you know, these areas are leased to cattle producers and they do have the requirement to burn them. And so I've met plenty of cattle producers that will tell you that cows love to eat Kogan grass. I'm not a producer, so I'm not going to fight them on that. I know it's probably not the most palatable plant that is available to them, but at least those reclaimed areas are serving an additional service other than just maybe underwhelming open space. So there's my dose of delusional optimism for you. Any other questions? This was great. Yes.
Plants all mostly in private ownership still?
Yes, so this map, the green polygons overlaying those other ones are, the light green areas are conservation easements and the dark green are like publicly available conservation lands. So like over here, you can see that they've only sold at development rights. But I imagine, that's a good question, but I think most of them are still owned by the phosphate companies.
I think you have a question in the chat.
I do, let's see. Oh, well, thank you very much, Ernie. And Tom, are you familiar with 3PR and the work that they are doing? I'm not, but, is it Allison, is that what you mentioned earlier? Was that 3PR?
It's something that I've heard about.
Was that you that mentioned that?
I don't know anything.
It's the people of Peace River.
Oh, the Peace.
Peace River.
Yes, I did go to them for some of the background research for this presentation tonight. But honestly, in doing that, my takeaway was that I want to know more and that I'm kind of informed about what they're up to. But yeah, great stuff. We definitely need more attention in this area. Oh, there's another one who popped up. Thank you very much, Ernie. All right, well, this has been awesome. Thank you guys so much for listening to me talk about phosphate. Yeah, I'm leaving it.
Or can you do the map up?
Oh, yeah. I can put this one back up. You want me to share it back to the online folks? Or you want the one from the PowerPoint? You sure?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks so much, Chelsea. It's always like a little bit depressing to learn about phosphate, but it's just part of our state's history. Still going on, you know, so us as citizens, there's always stuff we can do. I will say one little talking about optimism. If you look at like the east part of Manatee County, there's that green blob, that big green blob, that's Duet Preserve. And that was purchased back in the 1980s specifically to protect that property from phosphate mining. And it was purchased from a phosphate company. So there are success stories out there, but as you can see, that yellow circle, oh, here, never mind, push the button. But there's still land we can conserve. I will say too, our chapter recently made a donation to 3PR, which is that nonprofit we were talking about, the people protecting the Peace River. So they do a lot of outreach and kind of like watchdog stuff with these phosphate companies. So that being said, hopefully everybody can make it out on Saturday. Yes, Steve?
You have space, you still have space, and the field trip is.
Yeah, there's still like 10 spots left if anybody wants to make the trip. It's Paynes Creek Historic State Park, which I've never been there, so I'm excited to check it out. And Chelsea will be leading us through that. It's right in her backyard. And then there's also another event going on Saturday called Fire Fest, and that's going to be at Carlton Preserve in Sarasota. And we're looking for a couple more volunteers there. We usually have a booth. I know Kathy's going, so if anybody's interested in kind of hanging out for a few hours at Carlton Preserve at Fire Fest, it's a really cool event, but you can talk to Kathy afterwards. And either way, we hope to see you at either one of those events on Saturday. But other than that, that's all I have for you. There are some delicious cookies that I tasted earlier. Are those still, if those are still in the back, you should try one before you go. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, guys. Yeah, and the silent auction. There's a bunch of books that are like being auctioned off right now. I'll probably give that about like 2 more minutes if you guys want to make any bids.
In the mineral rights. Can you own the land and not own the mineral rights? What kind of a quagmire is that creating? I mean, can someone come in behind?
So I love that you asked me this question. I do this a lot of work every single day. And so, yes, so there can be severed mineral rights.